I woke up to a noise, a sharp, distinct click of the lock, like someone had just closed the front door. It was almost 2 in the morning. I instantly knew. The lady of the house had left for a business trip yesterday and wasn't supposed to be back for another 3 days, which meant only her husband and I were home. I held my breath. It wasn't exactly terrifying. Old house, drafts, creaky floorboards. But the silence that followed wasn't just loud. It was unnerving. I threw a sweater over my pajamas and stepped into the hallway. No lights were on. Only the faint glow of a street lamp filtered through the blinds. I crept a few steps toward the stairs and froze. I could hear footsteps downstairs. Slow, cautious, like someone was deliberately trying to move quietly, and like they weren't in any rush. I peeked around the corner. His silhouette moved toward the kitchen. He didn't see me. A bag hung from his shoulder. Dark, like a gym bag, stuffed full. He placed it on the table and began putting things inside. A first aid kit, a bottle of water, a small notebook. Everything looked ordinary, and yet that's what made it feel off. What was he doing in the middle of the night? Why didn't he say anything? And why did it seem like he was hiding? I returned to my room, clutching the doorknob as if trying to convince myself I imagined it all. I hadn't lived here long, barely 3 months. After Mom left for work in another state, I needed a temporary place to stay to finish school. My cousin offered me a room here. I had nowhere else to go, so I said yes. At first, everything was simple. Quiet, sterile. They lived with the kind of routine that never changed. But lately, that routine had started to crack. Now I lay in bed, listening to every sound, unsure if I was just anxious or if something truly was off. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't calm either. It felt like I was in a stranger's house, even though I knew every creak by now. Like the walls were hiding something I hadn't seen yet. I turned on my phone and checked my messages. Nothing. I thought about texting a friend, but deleted the draft. What would I even say? That a grown man was quietly packing a bag at 2 a.m.? I'd sound paranoid, but it didn't feel made up. He was about 10 years older than me. Always polite, composed, never intrusive. We rarely ended up alone in the house. But when we did, I could sense he was watching. Not in a creepy way, just observant. And sometimes there was something in those glances I couldn't quite decode. I never knew how to respond. I remembered a few days ago when he brought me tea while I was sketching. How he moved my chair closer and for a second his hand brushed the back of it. Was it accidental? Or was I imagining things? Everything seemed innocent, but something in me flinched. I told myself it was stress. Deadlines, sleepless nights, missing Mom. But now, after that sound and what I saw downstairs, it was hard to dismiss the unease. A mental thread had been pulled, and it wasn't stopping. I didn't go back to check. I just turned on my desk lamp, opened my laptop, and pretended to work. The same kitchen layout had been sitting on the screen for 3 days. A few minutes later, I heard him return upstairs. Calm, steady steps. He passed my door. Paused. I could feel it, without even turning around. But he didn't knock. Didn't say a word. Just went into his room. I heard the soft click of his door locking. I shut my laptop. A dull dizziness crept in from exhaustion and tension. How many times do we feel something is wrong and call it imagination? How often do we smother our instincts with logic? And how often do we regret not listening? That night, I didn't sleep. And as it turned out later, I was right not to. That was the moment when the feeling of safety I had so carefully built began to unravel. The next morning felt heavier than usual. I didn't sleep, just waited for the sun to rise so I could pretend things were normal. I went downstairs earlier than usual, hoping to avoid him, but he was already in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had happened. Calm, focused, like the night before didn't exist. He looked up and smiled. That same polite smile that used to feel safe. Now it just made my stomach turn. I poured cereal into a bowl, pretending not to notice anything. But the air between us wasn't neutral anymore. It felt charged, like a low humming you couldn't hear but could definitely feel. Every glance, every movement felt calculated. Or maybe I was just hyper-aware. He asked about my project. I answered in one-word sentences. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to get out of that house, but I had nowhere else to go. I was stuck in this beautiful home with quiet rooms and perfectly folded towels, and an undercurrent I didn't know how to name. Later that day, I tried to lose myself in work. I opened my laptop, laid out my sketches, and told myself I was overthinking. People pack bags at night. People move around their own homes. Maybe he had an early errand. Maybe I was just exhausted and paranoid. But when I passed by the front hallway, I noticed the bag was still there. The one he packed the night before. Same spot. Untouched. Nothing had changed, which meant whatever he was doing, he hadn't followed through with it. That shook me more than I expected. In the evening, I stayed in my room. I skipped dinner, claimed I wasn't feeling well. I needed distance, space to think. But thinking made it worse. Because every quiet moment replayed itself louder. How he lingered near me when I made tea. How he asked questions about my life no one else cared to ask. How his eyes softened when I laughed. I used to think it was kindness. Now I wasn't sure. The strange part was, I didn't feel fear. I felt drawn in, which scared me more than anything. It's a twisted kind of confusion when someone who's supposed to be just family starts feeling like something more. Not because of what they do, but because of how your mind begins to shift. It makes you question yourself, your boundaries, your past, your instincts. I remember sitting on my bed that night, laptop open, screen glowing, untouched. I wasn't working. I wasn't even pretending to. I was just staring. At nothing. At everything. Wondering where the line was. Wondering if I had already crossed it just by thinking about it. I started noticing the little routines we shared. Brushing teeth at the same time. Putting our mugs in the sink in the same rhythm. Those tiny details that shouldn't mean anything suddenly felt intimate. And once you notice them, you can't unsee them. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not because of noise this time, but because everything inside me felt unsettled. Like the ground beneath me was softening, and I was pretending it was solid. I wanted to talk to someone. I even opened my messages again. But what could I say? Hey, I think I might be catching feelings for my cousin's husband. That would get me blocked. Or worse, pitied, judged. So instead, I wrote in a blank document. Just typed thoughts, like I'm doing now. Because saying it out loud would make it real. And I wasn't ready for real. Not yet. I told myself this was just loneliness. Just attention. Just a moment. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going away on its own. It started with a flickering light above the stairs, then a loud snap outside. Everything went dark. No Wi-Fi, no sound, just the steady beat of rain hitting the windows and the occasional groan of wind slipping through the cracks of the old house. I grabbed a flashlight from my drawer, but its beam was weak, barely enough to guide me through the hall. He was already downstairs, lighting candles in the living room. When he saw me, he motioned toward the couch. "Might as well wait it out here," he said. I nodded. I didn't want to be alone in the dark, not with my thoughts. The room filled with flickering amber light and shadows that stretched and moved with every breath. He handed me a blanket, then sat across from me with a calmness that felt too controlled. We sat like that for a while, quiet, listening to the storm. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was worse. It felt warm, familiar, and dangerously close to intimate. I kept my eyes on the candle between us, pretending to study the flame, but I could feel his gaze. Not invasive, not obvious, but undeniably there. I broke the silence with a stupid question about power outages and emergency plans. He smiled and leaned back, talking about how he always wanted to live somewhere simpler. Fewer distractions, slower pace. He sounded tired, Not physically, but emotionally, like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. And then, without thinking, I asked him if he was happy. The words just slipped out. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the candle, then at me. His eyes softened in that familiar way again, the one that always made my chest tighten. "I don't know anymore," he finally said. And that's when it happened. His hand was on the table, inches from mine. I don't remember moving closer, or who reached first, but suddenly our fingers touched. Just barely. But we didn't pull away. It was the kind of contact that shouldn't have meant anything, but did. Everything around us blurred. The storm, the flickering lights, the hollow echo of thunder. My skin tingled where his fingertips grazed mine. It felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the months of walking around the tension without naming it. But I leaned forward, slowly, cautiously, searching for a reason to stop. There wasn't one. Our lips met in a kiss that felt more like a question than a statement. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't wild. It was hesitant, like both of us were waiting for the other to say this was a mistake. But neither of us did. It didn't last long. Maybe 10 seconds. But that was enough. I pulled back first, heart pounding, mouth dry. I couldn't look at him. He didn't say a word. Didn't chase, didn't explain. Just sat there, frozen. I stood up, muttered something. I don't even know what. And walked away, blanket still wrapped around me like a shield. My legs felt unsteady, like they didn't belong to me. Back in my room, I stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't look shocked. It looked calm. And that terrified me more than anything. Because if I felt no shock, no regret, what did that say about me? That night, I didn't sleep. Again, but not because of fear. Because something had shifted and I knew we couldn't go back now. The next morning, everything looked the same. But nothing felt the same. Sunlight streamed through the windows like it always did. The kitchen smelled like toast and coffee, just like every other day. But the moment I stepped out of my room, my body tensed, like it was bracing for something. I kept thinking, maybe he wouldn't say anything. Maybe he'd pretend it didn't happen. And maybe that would make it easier. He was at the table, reading something on his phone. When he looked up, his expression didn't change. No tension, no awkwardness. He just nodded once as if to say, "Morning," and went back to scrolling. Like the night before hadn't happened. Like my heart hadn't nearly stopped when our lips touched. I poured myself coffee and sat on the far edge of the table. He didn't look up again. We sat in silence, surrounded by the clinking of spoons and the faint hum of the refrigerator. It was so painfully normal, I could have screamed. I tried to focus on anything else. My school deadlines, emails, unfinished work. But every time I opened my laptop, I found myself staring at the screen without reading a word. My mind was stuck in replay. The moment his hand brushed mine, the way our heads tilted in sync, the stillness in the room after the kiss ended. I couldn't unfeel any of it. I told myself I needed distance, so I avoided him. I left the kitchen first, skipped lunch, and stayed in my room with my headphones on, pretending to work. I even kept the door slightly closed, something I rarely did. I needed that thin barrier between us, even if it meant suffocating in my own thoughts. But isolation didn't help. It made it worse. Because when I shut the world out, all that was left was me. And everything I didn't want to admit. Not just that the kiss had happened, but that part of me had wanted it to. That it wasn't entirely a mistake. That it had felt safe. Familiar. Like something that had been waiting to happen. Later that evening, I heard him walking through the hallway. His steps slowed near my door, then stopped. I froze, holding my breath. The silence on the other side felt like it lasted a full minute. But he never knocked. He just kept walking. That moment left a deeper mark than the kiss, because it confirmed something I'd been afraid to admit. We were both pretending nothing happened, pretending it didn't matter, pretending that silence meant safety. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat at my desk with my sketchbook open, pencil in hand, drawing random lines that led nowhere. My hand moved on autopilot, but my mind drifted to his face, to the way he hesitated, to the way I didn't. I thought about who I was before I moved into this house. Focused, clear-headed, independent. And now, I felt blurred. Like someone had taken a sponge to everything I thought I knew about myself. I kept wondering, was it really just a moment? Or was it the symptom of something deeper? A fracture neither of us wanted to look at too closely? The next morning, I found a note on the table. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even emotional. Just a few lines scribbled in quiet handwriting. I'm sorry for any confusion. Let's both stay focused on what matters. That was it. And somehow those few words stung more than anything he could have said. Because it wasn't an apology. It was a reset button. A cold, polite way of erasing what we both knew had already changed us. I folded the note and tucked it into my journal. I didn't want to forget it. Not because I wanted to remember him, but because I wanted to remember myself. The version of me who thought one kiss wouldn't matter. I was wrong. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to clean. That's what people do when they need control. They wipe, they fold, they organize. So I decided to straighten up the living room while he was out running errands. The house was too quiet again. No music, no voices, just me and the steady thump of my own thoughts. The storage bench by the window had always been a place I never touched. It wasn't mine, and I had no reason to go digging. But the lid wouldn't close properly, and the perfectionist in me couldn't let it go. So I opened it. Inside were old magazines, board games, a few candles, and one dusty shoebox tucked all the way in the back. I don't know why I opened it. I told myself I was just curious, just organizing. But when the lid came off and I saw the photo on top, everything inside me stilled. It was a picture of them, him and her, taken years ago, maybe during a trip. They looked happy, or at least like people pretending to be. But what caught me wasn't the image. It was the writing on the back. In faded blue ink. I hope someday you'll stop pretending. No name, no date. Just that. My fingers tightened around the photo. A cold, buzzing awareness ran through me. This wasn't a souvenir. This was a message. One that had been buried with everything else no one wanted to see. And for the first time, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the reason things felt off in this house. I hadn't caused the cracks. I'd just noticed them. I put the photo back and sat down on the couch, trying to slow my thoughts. That single sentence echoed louder than anything we'd said in the past week. It made me question everything I had assumed. About their marriage, about him, about myself. Maybe this tension hadn't started with me. Maybe I'd just stepped into a story that was already unraveling. And if that was true, then why did I feel so responsible? I wanted to believe I was just a guest, a placeholder, someone waiting to move on. But I wasn't just occupying a room anymore. I was tangled in something that had nothing to do with me, and yet affected me more than I was willing to admit. That evening, I didn't avoid him. I stayed downstairs, cooked dinner, sat at the table like nothing had happened. He was quiet, but not distant. We talked about nothing. The weather, deadlines, even the neighbor's broken fence. On the surface, we were calm. Underneath, I was burning with questions I couldn't ask. Why was that photo still there? Why keep it? Why write that? And who was it even from? But I stayed silent. Because silence felt safer, less real. After dinner, I went back to the living room alone. I sat on the floor by the bench and opened my sketchbook. But instead of drawing buildings or layouts, I sketched people. Two figures sitting side by side, facing forward, hands almost touching, but not quite. That was us. And then I wrote underneath, What happens to things that almost happen? I didn't want to be that person, someone who waits for stolen moments or blurry lines. But I already was. I had crossed something in myself, not because of a kiss or a feeling or a glance, but because I was starting to believe that what we shared might have had a reason. And maybe that was the most dangerous part of all. It started with rain again. Not a storm this time. Just a slow, steady drizzle that blurred the windows and made the whole house feel smaller. I had been sketching for hours, trying to lose myself in lines and angles, but my thoughts kept drifting. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the corner of the desk where I'd placed the folded photo. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. By late afternoon, the house was wrapped in silence. She was still away. Another trip, another stretch of empty rooms. He knocked softly once and stepped into the office without waiting for an answer. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I knew it was him by the way my shoulders tensed. "I can't focus," I said quietly, still staring at the blueprint on my screen. It was the closest I could get to admitting what I felt. "I figured you might want to step out for a bit," he said. "Fresh air." I hesitated, then nodded. We ended up under the back porch, both of us clutching mugs of tea we didn't really want. The rain tapped gently on the roof above us, filling the silence we couldn't. I kept thinking, don't do this again. Don't fall into whatever this is. You already crossed the line once. But there was no line anymore. Just a space. And us. Standing inside it. He talked first. About how strange it was to live in a house that felt less and less like home. About how sometimes two people drift without realizing they're already gone. I said nothing, but the words sunk deep. I looked at him, and for a second I didn't see someone else's husband. I saw someone lonely. Someone unraveling slowly, quietly, just like me. He reached for my hand. Barely. A light graze. Like he was asking a question without words. And I answered. I turned toward him, breath shallow, heartbeat stumbling. There was no pause this time. No thought. No guilt stopping me. I leaned in and he did too. The kiss was different. No flickering candlelight. No charged silence. It was soft. Still. His hand rested lightly on my arm, warm even in the cool air. I closed my eyes and let the moment settle. Just for a second, I stopped thinking. When we pulled back, neither of us spoke. But something passed between us. Not regret, not relief. Just reality. I stood up first. "I should go inside," I said, voice barely audible. He didn't try to stop me. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They weren't trembling. I wished they were. I wished there was a clear sign that this was wrong or dangerous or something I couldn't come back from. But all I felt was calm, and that scared me more than anything. That night, I lay awake again. Not restless this time, reflective. I thought about her, about what she didn't know, about what I hadn't meant to let happen. I told myself I would stop. I promised myself that this wasn't who I wanted to be. But even as I repeated those words, I knew something inside me had already shifted for good. Some changes don't announce themselves. They just happen. Quietly, irreversibly. She came back a day early. No calls, no texts. Just the sound of the front door unlocking in the middle of the afternoon while I was in the kitchen making tea. I turned, half expecting it to be him. But when I saw her walk in, suitcase in hand, I nearly dropped the mug. She looked calm, composed as always. Hair tied back, coat perfectly buttoned, not a strand out of place. She smiled briefly and set her bag down near the stairs like she never left. I stood frozen. He walked in seconds later, holding the mail. He hadn't seen her yet. And when their eyes met, I watched something shift in his face. Not surprise exactly, but something close. His hand flexed around the envelopes. Her eyes scanned him, then flicked to me. The look wasn't harsh. It was worse. Neutral. She greeted us like everything was normal. And maybe to her, it was. Or maybe she had already sensed it. Women always do. We feel tension in the air before it's ever spoken aloud. The rest of the afternoon passed in slow motion. She unpacked. He went silent. I busied myself with pointless tasks, wiping counters that were already clean, organizing the spice rack, folding blankets no one used. By dinner, we were all performing. She cooked like she always did. He set the table. I sat stiffly across from them, picking at food I couldn't taste. The room was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that listens, that waits. Afterward, she disappeared into the bedroom. He lingered in the hallway, glancing toward me, but didn't say a word. His eyes looked tired. Not physically. Soul tired. That night, I couldn't stay in my room. I needed to breathe. I went out onto the porch, hoping the rain would return, hoping for anything that might give me a reason to cry without having to explain why. But I wasn't alone for long. She stepped outside too. We stood in silence for a minute, side by side, both looking at the dark sky. "I've been gone a lot," she said softly, not looking at me. I nodded, though I wasn't sure she could see it. "I used to think time apart would help," she added. "That space could fix what started breaking." I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice. Then she looked at me. Really looked. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired, like his, but steadier. "I don't expect you to explain," she said. "And I'm not here to accuse anyone." My breath caught in my throat. I felt small, like a child caught with something fragile in her hands. "I just need to know," she continued, "what I'm walking back into." And that was it. No screaming, no accusations, just a quiet demand for truth wrapped in grace. I couldn't give her what she wanted, because I didn't know myself. I didn't know what we were, what I had become, or what I was doing living in a house that suddenly felt like it was shrinking around me. When she went back inside, I stayed on the porch. Long after the light in their room turned off, I thought of the kiss, the second one, the stillness of it, the calm. And I realized that calm can be the most dangerous feeling of all, because it tricks you into believing something broken might still be safe. I started packing the next morning, not because she asked me to. She didn't. Not directly. But silence has a way of saying things more clearly than words ever could. I folded my clothes slowly, methodically, like the act itself would bring clarity. One item at a time. No music, no distractions. Just me, the echo of an unfinished decision and the quiet rustling of fabric against a suitcase that suddenly felt too small for everything I carried inside me. He didn't ask where I was going. He must have heard the drawers opening and closing, must have seen the bag by the door. But he never came up. And honestly, I was relieved. That morning, I took a walk through town. I hadn't really let myself explore since moving here. I'd been too wrapped up in school, in tension, in him. Now, with a few hours of distance, I could finally feel my own rhythm again. The streets were quiet. The air smelled like wet leaves. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could hear myself think. I stopped at a small bookstore cafe on a corner I'd passed a dozen times but never entered. I ordered coffee, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. Not to work, but just to stare at the blank screen. I wasn't sure what I wanted to write. Maybe I just wanted to feel like myself again. And slowly, something in me started to settle. This wasn't a punishment. Leaving wasn't defeat. It was survival. I remembered a version of myself before I came here. Focused, driven, capable. I had goals that didn't revolve around stolen glances or quiet guilt. I wanted that girl back. I didn't want to be defined by what almost happened between us. I didn't want the narrative of my life to center around a man who didn't even know how to fight for anything. When I came back to the house, she was in the garden, clipping dead stems from her plants. Calm, collected. I passed her quietly, but she looked up. "You don't have to rush out," she said without judgment. "I know," I replied, and that was all. I wasn't running, I was choosing. That night, I stayed in a guest room at a friend's place across town. A small space shared with her cat and the hum of traffic outside. But it felt lighter. I could breathe again. I opened my journal and started writing for the first time in weeks. Not about him. Not about her. About me. What I learned, what I ignored, what I let happen, and why. I didn't dress it up or make it softer. I didn't blame anyone, not even myself. I just let it spill. And somewhere between the third and fourth page, it hit me. This house didn't change me. I let it. But that also meant I could choose who I wanted to be next. I wasn't the girl who kissed someone else's husband. I wasn't the guest who lost her place. I was someone who made a mistake, and then chose to stop it before it became everything. Some people cross the line and never look back, but I looked, and that made all the difference. I never went back to the house. Not to grab the last sweater I forgot in the closet, not to collect the shampoo bottle in the shower, not even to say goodbye. Some places stop being safe before they stop being familiar. And I knew if I crossed that doorway again, I'd carry part of it with me. I couldn't risk that. I was too busy learning how to be whole again. I moved into a small studio near campus. Just one room, a squeaky bed, and a coffee machine that only works if you hit the side twice. But it was mine. Entirely mine. Every time I turned the key, I felt something settle in my chest, a quiet certainty that I didn't owe anyone my presence anymore. I poured myself into work. I wasn't running, not this time. I was building. Sketches started to come alive again. Deadlines didn't feel like a punishment. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes, stopped wondering what he was doing, stopped scanning my inbox for his name. He never reached out. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. I think some people are meant to walk alongside you just long enough to teach you something hard. Like how thin the line is between comfort and danger, or how easy it is to confuse attention with affection, or how quickly a moment can cost you the version of yourself you were just beginning to grow into. A few weeks later, I found the photo again, the one with the writing on the back. I'd tucked it into a notebook without realizing. The message still haunted me. I hope someday you'll stop pretending. At first, I thought it was about them, but now I think it was meant for me too. I had been pretending long before that kiss ever happened, pretending I was fine with waiting for life to start, pretending that being needed was the same as being loved, pretending that silence meant safety. And it never did. One afternoon, while sorting through old sketches, I found one from the night everything changed. 2 figures sitting on a bench, not touching, but almost. I looked at it for a long time. Then I ripped it out and threw it away. Not out of shame, but because I didn't need it anymore. That story was over. Now I walk home from class and stop at the corner cafe. The barista remembers my name. I laugh with my classmates. I sleep without pacing. I write in my journal, not to process, but just to remember. And I draw. For myself, not for approval. I don't need anyone to tell me I'm doing okay. I can feel it in the quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits for something bad to happen. The kind of quiet that means nothing is hidden anymore. I don't blame him. I don't hate her. And I no longer carry guilt like a second skin. What happened, happened. What didn't matters just as much. And what I chose in the end is what defines me. Some chapters don't need a dramatic ending, just a clear one. I didn't leave broken. I left unfinished, and free to finish the rest on my own terms. And that, I think, is the most honest kind of ending there is.